Howdy, folks, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to the MatchNet podcast. This episode is a special edition. We're going to go deep into mother's words and father's words in the context of helping you guys prepare well for matching and blessing. This podcast really is dedicated for the single folks that are in our movement, the thousands of people that want to get matched and blessed and are curious to grow and want to address perhaps the hindrances and twigs in our lives that are trying to stop us from getting there. So if that's you, this podcast is, I believe, the only podcast on the planet that is just dedicated towards for you guys to help you get matched and blessed. So we make this stuff just to be helpful. And so if it is, then please follow and also importantly share with your team, especially if you have a team or working with your parents or matching supporter. Share this podcast with your team so that everyone can really benefit from the wisdom of our true parents. Okay. So I want to share these quotes with you guys because they made me feel something. And when I feel that something, I want to have give and take. And that's our hunduke for today. Mother says this: "This path is the only way to repay some of your debts to true parents. Isn't that right? How can we beautifully pass down this tradition for eternity? Everything depends on you. We cannot allow any unnecessary twig in our culture. It must have no shadow. It must be transparent. You must become citizens of that type of chanuguk." Do you understand? Okay, so the words that stand out to you guys, let me know. What are the words that stand out when we say it? Read this, all right? The words that, for me, she says, how can we beautifully pass down this tradition for eternity? What calls out to me is the reality that anything that is really passed down, eternally speaking, is through love, life, or lineage, right? Father talked about lineage being the primary of the three because lineage encapsulates love and life. And so the blessing itself is how tradition is passed down eternally. The blessing itself is passed down through not just receiving the blessing, my friends, but actually teaching children about it. And this is something I emphasize in my own, mentorship for matching candidates, but also to my own kids, is that as a parent to my children, I emphasize to them, I would rather you understand the blessing so much so that you want to teach your children about it than just get blessed for me as your parent or for some other reason. Because if you don't understand it and really have conviction in it, there's very little likelihood that you're actually going to teach your children about it. And so if it means, this is what I tell my son, he's the oldest, the 9-year-old. I say, if it means that you need to take some time to go through your own journey in life and come back to the blessing, then do that. And I would rather have you do that than receive this blessing willy-nilly without really understanding its essence. Right. And I know when I say that, there's something that goes off in people where it's like, oh, well, how much do I need to understand the blessing to really receive it? If you talk to anyone that's blessed, that's been blessed for a while and has really experienced it, will tell you the same thing, is that when we first got blessed, we didn't really understand what we were signing up for. We really didn't get it. And that's understandable and reasonable because through a certain lens, we can't really understand something fully without practicing it. Right? You can't really, it doesn't matter how many courses on philosophy or whatever you're studying at university you take until you actually go out in the world and apply it in the work field. It's not going to make much sense until you do it. And then you'll go, oh, wow, I really didn't know what I was thinking. And this is the kind of paradox we experience, is that the older we get, the older I get, the less I know. And the more I realize I don't know what I'm talking about. Right. And it's so interesting to me because I even recall being like, when I was just blessed 14 years ago, feeling like I'm a great husband. Oh my gosh. I laugh because I'm imagining my wife, Kitoe, listening to this. And also I laugh because every husband probably feels like this. I remember thinking, I'm a great husband. I'm a great husband. And that's probably, somewhat accurate. I wouldn't say it's not accurate, but what I was not realizing is that I had a very limited understanding of what it means to be a good husband because I'd never practiced it. I had a very limiting understanding of what the blessing means because I'd never practiced it. I had an intellectual understanding of the blessing, That's another way to put it. I was understanding the blessing at the mind level, not at the heart level. I was understanding what it means to be a quote unquote good husband on the mind level, right? I did all the right things, my friend, as a husband. When you first get blessed, I grew up in the West, right, in a culture where, generally speaking, there's a certain image of what a good husband is, right? It's the man that gets flowers for his wife on Valentine's, as a husband that surprises his wife with hugs and kisses and holds her hand and tells her how beautiful she is all the time and buys her chocolate, right, at certain times during the month. Nope, none of it. My wife does not associate at all. When I first got my flowers, got flowers for my wife, she was like, "Why?" She was so confused because if you didn't know this, in Japan, where my wife is from, she's very Japanese. Like she's from way up north Japan, where they barely speak Japanese where she's from. It's like it's called Tsugareben, which is like a very like isolated type of Japanese that Japanese people don't even understand. She speaks normal Japanese, but she also speaks this weird Japanese that she claims she doesn't have an accent, Japanese accent, but she definitely has a Japanese accent. Uh, so I got flowers for her, and she was like, she's like, I'm so confused. Why are you giving me flowers? And it turns out in Japan, the primary people that buy flowers are actually women, not men. Which in America, the primary target customer, the client is men that buy flowers for their wives, for their mothers, for the girlfriend, whoever. In Japan, it's women that buy flowers for their house because they want to have flowers in their house, right? And so you'll see these flower stands and shops all over Japan and the train stops, and it's women that are buying them. And so it's just an interesting cultural paradigm that I came into this relationship. It's like, yeah, women like flowers. No, apparently not all women do. And another one was like hand holding, for example. I guess I watched enough Hollywood movies to believe that women like when you hold their hand. I just assumed that going into a relationship, right? And of course, it's generalized, and some women love it and some don't. For my wife, in her case, she had, she never received a hug her entire life from anyone. All right. And say what you will about Japanese culture, people that hear that are like, oh my gosh, that's so traumatic. How could they do that to deprive a child? Here's the thing, guys. It's just not a thing in Japan. It's just not a thing, generally speaking, especially in her family culture. It wasn't a thing, right? And so I'm coming here like, I want to give hugs and love my wife up. And she's like, I don't know how to, I don't know how to be when you're hugging me. Like if you ever hug someone that's really awkward at hugging, they just kind of turn into a stick and they don't know what to do with their hands. Right? Oh my gosh. That was our relationship. Funny story. When father had the Songhua ceremony, he, there was 150,000 people there. Okay. I was one of them. All right. And just for context, the stadium holds 50,000 people. All right. So there's 100,000 people outside the stadium, just standing there and just watching screens anywhere they could. And there was a line of people going up all the way up to the palace, from when they did the procession of Chufather's casket thing. They brought it up to the Cheonjeonggung Palace, right? And there's a procession, and there was a line of people of 150,000 people lined up, right? And we had to walk up this mountain because there's no transport. There's way too many people here, right? And everyone's trying to get in to the Cheonjeonggung to see Chufather's casket and or go to the burial site and pay respects. And so I finally got to the top. And guess who is at the very top greeting everyone as they're coming into the palace doors at the gates? It's my wife, Hitue. All right. Keep in mind, I haven't seen my wife in about a year. All right. At this point, I hadn't seen her about a year because she was on STF. And because she was on STF, she had this opportunity to greet everyone coming into the door. So she's greeting thousands of people all day long. She's bowing. She's saying 안녕하세요, 환영합니다, 안녕하세요. She's bowing, welcoming everyone. Japanese too, right? She can speak Japanese as well. She can also speak English, so she's saying welcome. And then I get there. All right, her husband, like all these tens of thousands of people that are coming into this door, and she's greeting. I'm her husband, and I get to the gate, and I'm like you can imagine, I haven't seen her in a year. I'm like, I'm like freaking out, joyous, like so happy to see her. I'm like, Hitoe, like it's me, I'm here, you know? And then I jump on her and I give her a break, like a giant hug. You know what she says? She says, 안녕하세요, 환영합니다. Like this. She treats me like everyone else. And I was like, oh my God. If I was in a really bad state, I would have been mortified from that experience. But I just laughed it off and I was like, that's so funny to me that that's how Japanese she is. She takes her work so seriously that her husband she hasn't seen in a year, she just treats like everybody else. She goes, 안녕하세요, 환영합니다, like this. Oh my gosh, that memory's like burned into my mind. And here's the thing, like of all these differences in culture, and the biggest one is that men and women are different. Like that's what it breaks down to. My biggest realization is it's not that she's Japanese, it's that I'm a man, she's a woman. That's different enough. That's like 90% of the differences. And the other stuff is just personality traits and characteristics. It's like she's a woman, I'm a man. That's pretty biochemically very different individuals, right? Uh, but despite all the differences, it is because of the blessing that it's funny. That stuff is funny to me. If it was any other context, I would have been like, I can't believe you. Why would you do that? You're so offensive. How come you don't like my flowers and my chocolates? I'm so hurt, right? All the things that we try to do and love our wives, and she doesn't receive it, right? Because her love language is something completely different, by the way. Just a side note. Um, yeah, let me take this as a side note. Her, if we break down the love languages, which I don't agree with, and there's many people that don't agree with it, because the love languages are a very helpful frame for people that are just trying to figure out how to make things simple. But there's more, like some individuals, some like the marriage course, for example, they have like 21 different ways of expressing love that they've identified. And five is a very simplified version that's really helpful, but especially for the masses. But you really break down life. It's not, you can't break down love into five categories, right? Here's an example. This is my opinion. It's unpopular, I know. Of the five love languages that there are, we treat them like they're equal. They can't be equal, in my view. It's like receiving gifts and words of like affirmation, which is like compliments. You're beautiful. How can you equate that with quality time? There's no comparison. Quality time is a more powerful way to love someone generally, right? On average, at the end of your life, are you going to be remembering the people that said nice things to you or gave you gifts? Yes. But probably you're going to remember the people that spent time with you, right? Maybe the people that served you. And so I'm saying this because my realization is like, I was paying all this emphasis, like, oh, my love language is words of affirmation and my wife doesn't give me any, or it's physical touch and my wife doesn't give me any. Or in reality, I was being a little, I was being sheepish, let's say, a little busybody. And thankfully, her primary way of giving and receiving love is through time. Like, how much time are you giving? Not just time. It's like time is a physical representation of attention. It's like, how much attention are you giving to someone when you're with them? Are you listening to them? Are you being with them at the heart level, right? Not at the intellect and saying all the right things and listening in all the right ways. Are you really being with someone at the heart level? And that took me over a decade to realize, is like I was being a little sheep thinking like my wife needs to love me a certain way. But real acceptance is like, I'm going to accept you for who you are, as you are, and not make it good or bad. It's just that's who you are because you are a daughter of God, you're a son of God. And I respect that. And then at one point, I was like, you know what? Eventually, I'm going to have to accept my wife for everything she is. So I might as well accept it now instead of just suffer and say, oh, she needs to change. She needs to be better. She needs to be different. I was just like, that's stupid. Eventually, I'm going to have to accept everything she is. I have to. Eventually. I might as well accept it now and not make all these reasons like, but she needs to be this. I know. I've heard it all, guys. I know. Yes, we need to grow. Yes, we need to change. Yes, we do need to support and push each other. Yes, of course. But can we also simultaneously fully accept people, our spouse? Not accept as in tolerate. Difference. Not accept. Because accepting sounds like a passive thing, but it's a very active, action-oriented thing, acceptance. because you're creating a new thing. You're creating a new relationship. That when my spouse is like this, I don't have to react in anger. I can actually react with joy and humor and be like, oh, that's so funny. That's so funny. That's how you are, right? So why am I saying this? I'm saying this all to bring back to the point that yes, we're different and it's fun. It's actually really, really fun. And it's only suffering when we call it suffering. It's only hard when we call it hard. It's only too difficult and not supposed to be this hard when we say that. All right. And this brings us to the other thing, the next quote I want to bring us to, right? So my wife and I started our sexual relationship about 4 years into our relationship, into our blessing, right? Which is not recommended, by the way, but it was what we decided to do. And then, so we started really high hopes. You know, we got this really nice apartment in Japan, super expensive, right next to Tokyo Tower. I don't know why I thought that was a good idea. I wanted to, you know, when you're starting off your marriage, you want to provide for your wife. So I was like, I'm going to get this really nice apartment. And so I just did that. And lo and behold, I didn't know how to budget. And it was a stupid decision, but don't regret it because I learned a lot. And then we were arguing a lot, fighting a lot. And I didn't recognize that even though we had the high hopes of being this ideal couple and being perfect and not fighting, which I, for some reason, believed we would never fight. Contrast that with the reality that you have a man and woman trying to live together for the first time. Um, and so I created a lot of suffering because I put so many labels on this relationship. It's like, it needs to look this way. We need to not fight, for example. We need to not argue because that's a bad relationship. And we don't want a bad relationship. We need to do hundoke every day. We need to pray in this kind of way, like all these things. And I was creating my own suffering because when you have expectations so high, but then my actions weren't aligned with that, right? I was very, very reactive. I was, you know, producing a lot of fights and starting a lot of arguments with my wife. And so what I didn't anticipate is that this would be actually the hardest time of our life, not the most joyous time of our life, of our marriage. It was what I describe as rock bottom, because there were times, pinpoint memories where I was so angry. I just like left the apartment, just a lot of crying. And anyways, it's not a pretty sight. It's not a pretty time to talk about. I actually, I'm not like, I'll laugh about this stuff. I will laugh about this stuff because it's funny to me. You know, one distinct memory I like sharing and I laugh about is I went to the convenience store and I bought $30 worth of cake, you know, the Japanese cakes in the kombini stores. And I just ate it all at a park and I just cried. And I was like, and then I just like cried and I was just like so sad, but it was so good, delicious. I was dealing with my stress in that way. And then I left all the wrappers on the ground because I was a stupid idiot. I was just like, yeah, screw Japan. I'm gonna leave my dirty wrappers here like a real American. And I just left. Anyways, I've never done that, but that's one time I did that. And then I went and I went back to the apartment. And of course, Hitaway was like, where have you been? Like, what are you doing? And I didn't say anything. I was just like, I feel a little better, you know. Um, and then finally, she found the receipt. I've never told this part of the story. She found the receipt of the cakes I bought, and she was like, "What is this?" And I was like, "Oh, my trouble." I was so scared. She's just like laughing. She's like, "Why is there $30 worth of cake on this receipt?" And I was like, "That was that one night that I felt really depressed, and I went out and ate a bunch of cake, right?" And we laughed because usually people like, you know, sleep around or go drink alcohol or something or whatever. I just like went to the park and cried, very innocently. So I'm sharing this story because I felt so like I was failing. You can imagine. It's like I'm failing life. I'm failing this blessing. I'm failing marriage. It's not supposed to be this hard. All the things that go through your mind before people divorce, right? And then I had this insight, a little wisdom to go to Father's words. All right. So I opened the Chansangyang, and this is what I read. This is what I prepared for you guys. He says, if a man and a woman want to achieve individual perfection, they need to do so by perfecting their partner. And that is why they must marry. That is why they must marry. They cannot enter the realm of love if they are not married. The reason people marry is so they can relate to the love of God. A man and woman cannot fully connect to the love of God if they are not married. When they marry, the love of God resides with them and they become one through this love. God can then bequeath the whole universe to them, including God himself, his love, and everything that belongs to him. He goes on. People marry to perfect their individual love while at the same time perfecting the love of their partner. Doesn't it feel good to know you marry to perfect both your love and the love of God? Men and women have to marry to to prepare the foundation on earth through which God can love. The love of God can reside there. The love of God cannot reside there until a man and woman unite together based on the foundation of love. In the final analysis, people marry for the sake of God's love. That is to possess the love of God. All right. And so you can imagine when I read this, it changed my paradigm completely because I was suffering and I opened this and God says this, look, doesn't it feel good to know you marry to perfect both your love and the love of God? And when I read that, my first thought was, no, it doesn't feel good. It feels miserable. I feel miserable. But then I understood what Father is saying. He's saying you marry to perfect the love of God, to experience the love of God. That's the point, the purpose. It's the purpose. Do you understand, guys? It's the purpose. That's the whole purpose. And when I got that, I was like, oh, I've got this all wrong. The purpose is not to be happy. It's not to be happy all the time and enjoy life. It's actually what I'm experiencing right now is the process of growth through which I can experience more love and love my wife more, and my wife can love me more, and therefore experience God more. That's it. And at the end of this day, if I can love my wife more, that's the purpose of the blessing. At the end of the challenge, if I can love her more than I did yesterday, that's the purpose. And so my mentality went instantly, guys, like overnight was from this is really hard and the blessing is not supposed to be this hard and I'm suffering to, and that's okay because this is what it's about. This is what it's about. It's experiencing more love. It's not the suffering that's the purpose of the blessing. Let me emphasize that. It's suffering that creates the greatest opportunities for growth and experiencing more love in our lives, experiencing more God in our lives. And so I do not regret the suffering, and I do not condone avoidance of suffering at all. It is through suffering that we create in our own lives for ourselves, by the way, that we can experience the most deepest realms of God's love and God's heart. Think about that for a second. You cannot experience God more so than being with a spouse that you're just being yourself with and they just receive you with grace. When you really let loose all your shadows and your shame and they just give you nothing but love and grace, there's nothing more precious in the world than that, than experiencing that with a parent, with your spouse, with your kids. And then eventually you guys will have children, which will create the greatest opportunity for growth and love in God through the difficulty, through the suffering. And that's the point. That's the point. But as soon as we add intellect and, oh, it shouldn't be this hard, and our minds start taking over, like, oh, that person has a great relationship, says who? Or this is what it should look like according to what I believe. As soon as we add ourselves to the equation, we have failed, we've lost because we're putting external before internal. That's what that is. Putting external before internal. And you can do that to an extent, but eventually you will create your own suffering. You will create your own lacking of a real reality. And the reality is that internal comes first, always. It's priority. It's number one. It's the main, and external is secondary. External is important, yes, but it's secondary. I'm not saying external is not important, not at all, but it's secondary. Why? Because internal will dictate everything external. Who you are as a person individually, internally will predicate everything that you do externally. Who you become, who you are is more important. Your marriage is based on the foundation of who you are as a person, how much love you're experiencing. And this is why I emphasize to single people, Right now, while you're single, preparing for matching blessing, the most important thing that you do is experience God in your life. Period. End of story. However you do that first. Everything else will make sense. Everything else will make sense. God will make, true parents will make more sense. The blessing will make sense to you if you really feel it closest with God. Simultaneously develop your relationship with true parents. The blessing makes sense. Finding a spouse will be easy because you will feel who the right person is and not intellectually know who the right person is. You cannot intellectualize this stuff, guys. How to choose a spouse. You cannot. Think about it logically for a second. Like, let's put on your intellect cap for a second. How do you know? How will you ever know intellectually who the right person is? You will never know. I will never know if I chose the right spouse for me. You will never know. You can't know, but you can feel it. You can know it at the heart level. This feels right. I trust this. I trust that God is working through this. And that, interestingly, is how God will actually work in your life, in your relationship, is through trusting yourself, your original mind, not the intellect mind, not trusting what you think might be the best thing, but trusting your heart. And that's how God will work. And that's a dicey game to play, by the way. How many people do we know that say, oh, this is God's will, using the Lord's name in vain? That is what that is, by the way. Using the Lord's name in vain is God told me to do this, and therefore it's the right thing to do. But if you lack intuition and introspection and self-awareness and being able to observe your own self and say, actually, I might be wrong, just have that at the back of your mind at all times. You'll be okay. I might be wrong. I don't know. Maybe I might be wrong. But you can know that God has the right answer. And as soon as you put the external first, think about it like this, you're essentially saying you know better than God. You know better than your own original mind. Is when you say, I want somebody from this country, from that country that speaks this language, or is this tall, or has never had this experience, or has only had this experience. If you start intellectualizing this stuff, you have essentially forfeited God to work. You have to forfeit that stuff. I recommend all of it. It's okay, yes. External is fine, but it's secondary. Do you understand what I'm saying, guys? It's secondary. In some respect, it doesn't actually matter, because if you have the primary internal stuff done first, then the secondary stuff will come naturally. So you don't even have to focus on the secondary stuff. It's like a big domino effect where you push down the first domino, the second domino will follow. That's it. It's really simple. But think about it like this. Most of the universe, most of the world, all of the spirit world is internal, right? You could call it quantum physics. You could call it spirituality. You could call it space. You could call it, like, every religion, every book on the planet talks about the same thing, the essence of the universe. Whatever you call it, guys, God. Think about it like this. That is most everything. Even atoms itself, even matter itself is mostly nothing. It's mostly empty space. I was looking at the stars the other day because I'm a little philosopher at heart. I was sitting on the hammock outside my house, looking at the trees and looking at the stars outside. At night, the kids are going to bed. I was spending just 10 minutes outside by myself, just looking at the stars. And this thought came to me. I was like, space. Why do we call it space? I was thinking like this. We only call it space because we call it space. Space is actually nothing. Space doesn't exist, right? Stars are like four light years away, and we can see them with our own eyes. Why is that? Besides the sun, why is it that we can see a star that is trillions of miles away? Because there's nothing between it and us. That's a miracle, guys. Like, there's no reason we need to be able to see stars from an evolutionary biological standpoint. The only reason we can see stars is because there's nothing in between us and that. And of course, they're massive balls of sun energy. It's amazing to me. And I was looking at the stars and I was like, we only call it space because we call it space. There's actually no space. And then I was thinking about atoms, and like almost everything is nothing. Actually, most of everything is spirituality, right? Is God, is love. And yet, here's the catch, guys. And yet, we focus endlessly on the external. We focus endlessly, constantly on How do I look? What time is it? What am I going to eat tomorrow? I'm stressed from work. I got to make more money. I need to focus on this. I'm scared about my matching process in the future, right? It's all just physical stuff. And we focus so much on it that it blows my mind how far we are generally from understanding this. True mother and true father understand the internal, they understand the spirit. If you hear true mother's words, here's a person that really understands something divine, even to the point that we don't understand it. It took many years for us really to start to crack the code on what mother's saying, right? Think about that. And that's because she's operating at a level that for a lot of us has been incomprehensible because we're thinking about things from a physical, humanistic standpoint and not spiritual eyes. But when you open your spiritual eyes for a second and look at what mother's saying and what father's saying, it's like, oh, like there's stuff I don't understand. There's that, what is it, 0.0001% of stuff that I'm focusing on. But then there's the 9.9999% of stuff, sorry, 99.999% of stuff that I'm completely ignoring. And that's what father and mother talked about. True father was a guy who, my goodness, he like, think about what he did in his life. It's pretty spectacular. Like all of the businesses and ministries and people and impact and movement that he's done just within our lifetime, right? And I just talked about being in a matching ceremony with that guy. That's crazy. The hundreds of thousands of people that he personally matched, like lineages that were started because of these two individuals, that is an impact that will ripple on through generations and history to come. And we don't even see it yet. But I think when we tap into the internal, the spiritual, the non formal, then we start to tap into something that's truly beautiful and should never forget our attention because that's primary. The internal is primary. Okay. So that's the message I want to leave with you guys today. Internal is primary, external is secondary. Almost to the point that I want to say, forget the external. And that has come off the back of most of my life being the external guy. My wife will tell you too. It's like I'm the external guy in our family and she's the internal one. But I have shifted from being an external person. I'm an external person that has learned to be internal. And that's why I value it so much. I treasure it so much so because I know what it's like to be external. I know what it's like to focus on things that don't matter nearly as much as the internal. All right. And sometimes you have to go through your own experiences to realize that stuff. And I have experienced it and I know it with conviction. So that's the message for you guys. Lots of love to you all. See ya.